Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Trader Talk, or I'm not really sure what we're going to call this one, but we're going to talk about what altcoin and crypto traders can learn from everything that's happened with the Beyond Meat stock. So how are you going, Dan?
Good. How are you, Alex?
Very good, thanks. And I thought we'll give people a little bit of a background. So for those that don't know, Beyond Meat is a company that's come out and produced plant-based burgers, and we know there's a growing movement, and veganism is certainly growing. But I know you've got some thoughts on this, and you've worked on hobby farms, and you're in touch with nature, Dan. So I'd love to hear your thoughts, and then I'll share some of mine.
Yeah, so it's an interesting business model because I'm essentially the target market in the sense that a lot of places that it's popping up now and getting popular, this Beyond Meat burger. I believe Burger King's looking into it in places like that. So when I'm driving down the highway in the U.S. and I'm doing a road trip, the highways are lined with McDonald's and all your standard corporate fast food restaurants, and there's really nothing for me there. So if you're going to get me to pull over in the middle of an 8-hour road trip and will be willing to get something, it's going to be this burger for me personally, just because I'm not going to eat fast food meat, and that's just coming from a experience of seeing it and seeing what a small farm is and what a giant farm is, and not wanting to put that in my body. And so it's interesting that it's gaining so much popularity in that sense because it's understandable. Now the question then becomes, is there an attachment between reality of what the company is doing and the stock price? And that's where there's this disenfranchised craziness going on in the stock market. But why don't you share your thoughts on the Beyond Meat burger, and then we'll go into the stock trading aspect of it.
So just to clear that up, you're not a vegan, but you're very much of the school of thought that you can eat animals, but as part of a sustainable, your own little hobby farm where you raise your own chickens and that sort of thing. Is that mindset?
Absolutely. And I went to Iceland fairly recently, and what I saw there was just, wow, this is how it should be done, and how in touch they are with their animals and their sheep. And the argument, of course, is, well, they shouldn't be eating anything, when in reality on Iceland, there would be no humans there if they weren't grazing this with sheep. And then the question boils down to, is it worth it to be created for meat as a sheep and live an incredible, however long, couple of years on a countryside with all the grass you could ever want, or just never exist? And that's where a lot of the back and forth goes as well. So for me personally, I try and eat as local as possible, where I know where the animal came from and how it was treated. When I do have meat, I personally don't really cook meat much for myself, but that's just me.
Yeah, I mean, down in Tasmania, we're very lucky. Got lots of local markets, grass-fed beef, and I do understand the arguments. And there's some good documentaries out there. Forks Over Knives. I think Food Inc. is another one where we do see that the bad treatment and the mass farming of animals. So everyone's entitled to their opinion, and we certainly respect all that on the channel. I know you do too. But I think it gets interesting when you boil down to, well, what's this made out of? And it's these genetically modified and these isolates. And in the news recently, it was containing small amounts of glyphosate, and that's been labelled as probably carcinogenic to humans. So there's all these if, buts, and maybes around what it contains, and if you are eating, similar to a plant. So I think that's probably enough of the politics behind it. But I just wanted to raise a few points that once you've done organic chemistry and biochemistry, a lot of people aren't aware that a mushroom is more closely related to an animal than a plant. So I think people sort of don't always have all the information to make up their mind. Would you say that's fair?
Yeah, I was just hanging out with someone the other day, and it was brought up somehow, and I said, they're not really that great for you. And they were surprised because the perception of the company and the product is like it's this great healthy thing, when in reality, I like the food that I eat I know what everything on the back means and what it is, and very simple ingredients, and it's not the case.
Yeah, and I think we've had the conversation before around plants having consciousness just like animals, but we won't go down that rabbit hole today. So let's talk about the stock and what happened. It IPO'd at around $25 and it recently hit $240. Have you been following it closely and trading it?
Yeah, I've traded it a few times, nothing significant, just little day trade flips, but not many, because this game is definitely, if I were trying to be really aggressive in this space or trading anything, I would be looking at names like that. But wanting to be a bit more conservative, it's just not worth the risk to reward. But it's a scenario that we see play out time and time again, where we have these euphoric cycles and a limited amount of shares and a limited ability to short and irrationality. So anybody that trades based on fundamentals gets caught up in it and becomes part of the perpetual little short squeeze and the insane run up. And we see it in GoPro. TLRY was a marijuana stock that did it. Pollo Loco Chicken, a fast food kind of place, they did it. It's a very common thing that happens after an IPO. And the way I imagine it, which I don't think is reality, but I imagine just a group of the fat cats just saying, we're going to choose this one. We're going to run this one this time. It has the right headlines and the right recipe to make it happen. And again, it just, once every year, a couple times a year, it plays out this way.
And this is where you can really learn as a crypto trader. It's very similar to the IEOs in terms of low stock being floated, then being able to short it and people being able to borrow it. And I think the stat was 70% of the stock is now being borrowed to short. And then you're left with a few of the hodlers, and then you have maybe 5 or 10% of actual stock being traded where we dictate the price from. And this is how things get out of whack. It's very similar in the crypto markets.
Yeah, it's what they call the float in the stock world. The float is the free trading shares or coins or whatever it is. And the smaller that float is, smaller the supply is, and the higher the demand is, the more crazy valuations get, where again, just fundamentals make absolutely no sense. The numbers are meaningless. It goes completely out the window. The only thing we can derive from it is knowing that it will come back down to reality eventually, but time is the unknown factor as to how long that's going to take.
So how this played out was the stock listed at 25 and started going parabolic, and I think it got up to 150 or 180, and people were saying, this is crazy. And that's when the short sellers come in and they borrow that stock off their broker and they bet that it's going to go down. But once you have 70% of the shares all being shorted, I think the cost to borrow went up to 144% annually. So you're basically saying that this thing has to go to zero within a year, or you're going to lose money even if you're right. But then if they have the slightest bit of good news or the euphoria continues, as you say, it's that short squeeze that we see playing out time and time again in the crypto world, and it touched 240.
Yeah, there was an example just one afternoon where we had an all-time high, the bulls made a move, and they rejected from the all-time high. It was a clear double top, and there was a solid little 5-10% pullback from that double top, and bears made a nice little win. And it was right into the end of the day. And I zoomed out to the hourly, and I said, that's an hourly bull flag. I bet they're going to gap that up and trap everybody that thought they just nailed the double top. And that's exactly what happened the next day. And everybody that went bearish on that pullback and that double top is now in the red and part of that short squeeze.
Yeah, and hopefully you are following along at home, and if we have that sort of 10% number as the float that we described earlier, but you've got 70% of people that are now trapped and underwater, they're constantly trying to buy. So it might be 10% of people actually trying to exit their positions, and there's only 10% of stock, and it just keeps pushing that stock higher. So how do you think this plays out, Dan? Is this, the non-reality can continue going forward?
I think, it always comes back to earth eventually. It's a bubble, and the bubble pops and it comes back down. GoPro is, it ran up to 90 something. I think it's trading at $5. Some of those names are never going to get back to those all-time highs. And it's the same thing that we saw in the altcoin world in 2017, where, again, the tangibles and intangibles are so hard to value that the numbers go out the window and the market caps don't matter. I've traded penny stocks, and when a run goes on those marijuana penny stocks, companies that I know are never going to turn profit and are potentially scams run up to a $500 million market cap, and it makes absolutely no sense. But human emotion, which is the cycle that is on repeat that we continue to have examples of this for, it's just the way it works.
Yeah, I agree that it will come back down and reality will kick in, but I think the take-home message is that even those people that shorted might not end up making money. Their cost to borrow might eat up their capital. They might get out at a 60% win, but it costs them 70% to hold those shares. So I guess there's sort of these underlying messages that it is complicated in the world of shorting and longing, even in the stock market. And this is the last message I wanted to pass on, was about why we don't see every coin being listed on margin on crypto exchanges, because it is this high danger when you have such a small float. And even top 10, 20 cryptocurrencies we see with these hugely volatile moves or flash crashes because of this similar reason.
Yeah, and like you said, even options. So if you're not short the shares and paying for that margin, if you're playing the options, the time decay, or I should say the implied volatility, which is so high on the way up, it just starts to shrink because we get these tightening ranges as consolidation happens. And that's where the option sellers are really raking in the money as volatility drops off significantly from what it was.
Yeah, and for people at home who are getting into options, you might think, oh, this is a no-brainer. I'll sell some calls or buy some puts, but they're so expensive because of the volatility and uncertainty, and nobody wants to sell them to you, even though your thesis is right. You may be wrong.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot to take away from that. Hopefully you've learned something at home today, guys. And any final messages for people, Dan?
That's all I got. I was an options trader 4 years into my career after I was very comfortable with charts and it was going well. And it was like starting over to a certain degree. It was like, wow, I have a whole new game I have to learn. It is different. So just practice, take your time. It's a slow road to learn it. And definitely don't dive in with options because it's very easy to blow up your account.
Definitely, I've made those mistakes in the early days as well. So thanks for tuning in, guys. Thanks for joining us, Dan. We'll talk again soon. Cheers.
See you later.